I found out my HOA president was completely insane on a Tuesday morning when the temperature dropped to -8 degrees and my doorbell rang at 6:30 in the morning. I stumbled out of bed, my breath visible even inside my house, because the ancient furnace had finally given up the ghost sometime during the night. I'd woken up shivering under 3 blankets, and the first thing I'd done was dig out the 2 portable electric heaters I kept in my garage for emergencies. One was running in my bedroom, the other in my living room, and they were the only things keeping my pipes from freezing solid. When I opened the door, still in my flannel pajamas and a thick robe, I found Patricia Cunningham standing on my porch. She was the HOA president of Meadowbrook Commons, our little subdivision in Amarillo, Texas. Patricia was in her early 50s, with that distinctive haircut that seemed to come standard with every HOA president I'd ever encountered. You know the one. Ooh. Short, aggressively styled, with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She wore a puffy North Face jacket that probably cost $600, designer jeans, and boots that had never seen actual snow despite the 3 inches coating my driveway. "Warren Owens," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "I need to discuss an urgent matter with you." "Patricia, it's 6:30 in the morning and it's 8 degrees below zero," I said, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to go well. "Can this wait until a reasonable hour?" "No, it cannot." She pushed past me into my house without invitation, and I was too cold and tired to argue. "I've been walking the neighborhood this morning, and I've noticed something very concerning." I closed the door and turned to face her, pulling my robe tighter. "What's that?" "You have portable heaters running." She said this like she'd just accused me of running a meth lab. "I can see them through your windows, one in your bedroom, one in your living room." I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I said, "Yes, Patricia, I have portable heaters running because my furnace died sometime last night and it's -8 degrees outside. Section 14, paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all heating must be done through approved central heating systems," she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what I assumed was a digital copy of the bylaws. "Portable heating devices are only permitted as supplementary heating, not primary heating sources." "My furnace is broken," I repeated slowly, as if talking to a particularly dense child. "The HVAC company can't get here until tomorrow at the earliest, because half of Amarillo's heating systems failed overnight. I'm running the heaters so my pipes don't freeze and burst. This is an emergency situation." Patricia pursed her lips in that way that told me she was about to say something truly ridiculous. "The bylaws don't have exceptions for emergencies. You'll need to turn off those heaters immediately or face a fine of $100 per day per violation." "Per violation?" I felt my jaw drop. "You mean per heater?" "That's correct, so that would be $200 per day until you come into compliance with the bylaws." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain what little patience I had left. "Patricia, I'm not turning off my heaters. It's literally freezing inside my house. Look, you can see your breath." I gestured at the air between us, where our breath formed little clouds. "Then you'll be fined," she said primly. "And if you continue to violate the bylaws, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action." Something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the fact that I'd been dealing with Patricia's increasingly absurd HOA demands for the past 2 years since I'd bought this house. Maybe it was just too early in the morning for this level of stupidity. "You know what, Patricia?" I said, a dangerous idea forming in my head. "You're absolutely right. I'm using these heaters as my primary heat source, which violates the bylaws. But here's the thing. I don't actually own these heaters." She blinked at me, confused. "What?" "I rent them," I said, the lie flowing smoothly now, "from a company that specializes in emergency heating solutions. They're rental units. And according to Section 14, Paragraph 7, rental equipment for emergency home repairs is permitted on the property for up to 30 days without HOA approval." I had no idea if Section 14, Paragraph 7 said anything remotely like that. But I was betting Patricia didn't have the entire bylaws memorized either. She narrowed her eyes at me. "I'll need to verify that." "Be my guest. But while you're verifying, I'm going to keep running these rental heaters because I have no interest in dealing with burst pipes and thousands of dollars in water damage." Patricia's face was turning red, which was impressive given how cold it was. How much does this rental company charge? And here's where my sleep-deprived, frozen, thoroughly annoyed brain made a decision that would change the next several weeks of my life. $300 per day, I said, per heater. Her eyes widened. $600 per day to rent 2 space heaters? Emergency rates during a freeze, I said with a shrug. Supply and demand. You should see what they charge for the industrial-sized ones. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was clearly doing the math in her head. If she pushed the bylaw violation angle, I'd be fined $200 per day. If what I was saying was true, I was already paying $600 per day for the rental heaters, which meant I was clearly taking the situation seriously, and the HOA couldn't really argue I wasn't addressing the problem. I want to see the rental agreement, she finally said. Sure thing. I'll email you a copy once I'm actually awake and dressed. I moved toward the door, opening it pointedly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to go stand next to one of my very expensive rental heaters. She left, but the look she gave me told me this wasn't over. I closed the door and leaned against it, wondering what the hell I'd just done. Then I went to my bedroom, pulled out my laptop, and spent the next hour creating the most official-looking rental agreement I could manage. I named the fake company Lone Star Emergency Heating Solutions, gave it a professional-looking logo I whipped up in Canva, and wrote up a contract that specified a rental rate of $300 per day per unit with a minimum 3-day rental period during emergency weather conditions. I printed it out, signed it with an illegible scribble that was definitely not my actual signature, and emailed a scanned copy to Patricia before I left for work at my job as a software developer for an agricultural tech company downtown. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia called me at 2 in the afternoon. I tried to look up Lone Star Emergency Heating Solutions, she said without preamble. There's no listing for them online. They're a small operation, I said, barely looking up from my code. Word of mouth, mostly. They probably don't have a website. There's no business license registered in Potter County for that name. Have you tried Randall County? Or maybe they're based out of Lubbock. Listen, Patricia, I'm at work. Is there a point to this call? The point is that I think you're lying, she said, and I'm going to prove it. She hung up before I could respond. I sat back in my chair, staring at my phone. This was getting out of hand. I should probably just come clean, apologize, and pay whatever fine she wanted to levy. It would be easier than maintaining this ridiculous charade. But then I thought about all the other absurd things Patricia had done since I'd moved in. The time she'd measured my grass with a ruler and fined me because it was 3 1/4 inches instead of the mandated 3 inches. The time she'd sent me a cease and desist letter because my car was parked 6 inches over the line on my own driveway. The time she'd tried to fine my elderly neighbor for having wind chimes that were creating a noise disturbance, even though the nearest house was 50 feet away. No, I decided. I wasn't backing down. If Patricia wanted to play games, we'd play games. My furnace got fixed the next day, but I kept the heaters running anyway. I figured if I was committed to this bit, I might as well commit fully. I moved them around the house periodically, making sure they were visible from different windows at different times of day. I knew Patricia was watching. On Thursday, 3 days after the initial confrontation, Patricia showed up at my door again. This time, she had backup. A tall, thin man in his 60s stood beside her, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who really didn't want to be there. Warren Owens, this is Gerald Fisher, Patricia announced. He's the HOA's compliance inspector. We're here to conduct a property inspection. Do you have an appointment? I asked, not moving from the doorway. We don't need an appointment for compliance inspections, Patricia said. Section 9, Paragraph 2 states that HOA officers may conduct property inspections with reasonable notice. And you consider showing up at my door to be reasonable notice? We sent you an email an hour ago, she said smugly. I pulled out my phone and checked. Sure enough, there was an email from Patricia sent at 4:30. It was now 5:30. I looked up at Gerald, who gave me an apologetic shrug. Fine, I said, stepping aside. Come in. They entered, and Patricia immediately began pointing at things. There, living room, 1 portable heater, and I can hear another one running somewhere else in the house. Bedroom, I confirmed. Gerald made notes on his clipboard. Up close, I could see he looked tired. Mr. Owens, can you confirm that these are rental units? That's correct. And you're paying $600 per day to rent them? That's correct, I said again, pulling out my phone and showing him the fake rental agreement I'd created. Emergency rates during extreme weather. Gerald studied the document, then looked at me with something that might have been respect. That's quite expensive. Cheaper than burst pipes and water damage, I said with a shrug. Patricia was practically vibrating with frustration. I want to contact this company directly, she insisted. Give me their phone number. Here's where things got interesting. I'd anticipated this possibility, so earlier that day I'd done something either very clever or very stupid, depending on how you looked at it. I'd gone to one of those websites that lets you get a temporary phone number for receiving calls and texts. Then, I'd set up a Google Voice number that forwarded to my personal cell phone, but with a different caller ID. I rattled off the number to Patricia. She immediately dialed it on speakerphone. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I let it ring 4 times, then excused myself to the bathroom. Once inside with the door closed and the fan running for noise, I answered the call in the deepest, most professional voice I could manage, adding just a hint of a Texas drawl. Lone Star Emergency Heating Solutions, this is Mike speaking. How can I help you? Yes, this is Patricia Cunningham. I'm calling about a customer of yours, Warren Owens. He claims to be renting 2 portable heaters from your company at a rate of $300 per day per unit. Let me pull up his account, I said, making shuffling paper noises by rustling some toilet paper. Ah, yes, Mr. Owens. Started his rental on Tuesday morning. 2 of our deluxe units. Is there a problem? I'm the president of his HOA, and I need to verify this rental agreement is legitimate, Patricia said. Well, madam, I'm not sure what you want me to verify. He signed a contract, his credit card went through, and we delivered the units. That's about as legitimate as it gets. $300 per day seems excessive. It's a freeze, madam. Everyone wants heaters. We only have so many units. Basic supply and demand. If he wants to return them early, that's fine. But he's still on the hook for the minimum 3-day rental period, as specified in the contract. I could practically hear Patricia's teeth grinding through the phone. What's your company's address? I gave her the address of a UPS store in Lubbock that I'd looked up specifically for this purpose. Though we're a mobile service, so you won't find us at the office much. We're usually out making deliveries or pickups. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, Patricia said coldly and hung up. I flushed the toilet for effect, washed my hands, and returned to find Patricia and Gerald standing awkwardly in my living room. Satisfied? I asked. Patricia's expression was tight. For now, but I'll be monitoring the situation. They left, and I collapsed onto my couch, my heart racing. This was getting way too complicated. I should just return the heaters to my garage and be done with it. But I didn't. Over the weekend, the temperature rose back to a reasonable 30 degrees, and most people's furnaces were back up and running. Mine had been working fine since Wednesday, but the heaters stayed out. I'd committed to the bit, and apparently I was seeing it through. On Monday morning, I had another visitor. This time it was my next-door neighbor, Frank Martinez. Frank was in his early 70s, retired from the Air Force, and one of the few people in Meadowbrook Commons who seemed to have a functioning sense of humor about the HOA's ridiculousness. So I heard Patricia tried to shake you down over some space heaters, he said when I answered the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. News travels fast, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Patricia's been telling everyone who'll listen that you're some kind of con artist, pretending to rent heaters when you really own them just to get around the bylaws. Frank grinned. I think it's hilarious. I'm not sure con artist is the right term when I'm literally just running heaters in my own house, I said. Oh, I know. That's what makes it so funny. She's so wound up about this, and there's basically nothing she can actually do about it. He took a sip of his coffee. Though I should warn you, she's talking about calling a special HOA meeting to vote on an emergency bylaw revision that would ban rental heating equipment. I groaned. You're kidding. Nope, she's serious as a heart attack. Meeting scheduled for Wednesday night at the community center. This was escalating beyond anything I'd anticipated. Frank, level with me. How much trouble am I in here? He considered this for a moment. Legally, none. You're not actually violating any rules, even if the rental thing is fake. Practically, Patricia's got a mean streak and a long memory. She's going to make your life difficult for as long as you live in this subdivision. She already makes my life difficult, I pointed out. Fair point. Frank finished his coffee. Well, if you need someone to testify at your kangaroo court on Wednesday, let me know. I've been wanting to tell Patricia what I think of her HOA presidency for about 3 years now. The special meeting was called for Wednesday at 7 p.m. I showed up at 6:45 to find the community center already packed. Apparently, word had spread that there was going to be drama and people had turned out for the show. The community center was a small building at the entrance to our subdivision with a single large room that could hold maybe 60 people if everyone squeezed in. There were already about 40 residents there when I arrived, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front where Patricia sat with the other HOA board members. Besides Patricia, there was Linda Ashford, the treasurer, a nervous-looking woman in her 40s who always seemed to be apologizing for something. Next to her was Robert Chen, the secretary, who was in his 30s and seemed to spend most meetings playing on his phone. The fourth board member, Vice President Donald Pierce, was a stocky man in his 50s who owned a car dealership and had opinions about everything. I took a seat near the back next to Frank, who gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of a gavel that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have an urgent matter to address regarding a potential bylaw violation and what I consider to be an abuse of the HOA's emergency equipment provisions. Several people turned to look at me. I gave a little wave. As some of you may have heard, one of our residents has been using portable electric heaters as his primary heat source, despite having a functioning central heating system, Patricia continued. My furnace was broken for 2 days, I called out. It's fixed now. But you're still running the heaters, Patricia shot back. Because I'm renting them for 3 more days until the rental period is up, I said. I'm not going to waste money returning them early when I've already paid for the full period. That's exactly the issue I want to address, Patricia said, her voice rising. I believe this entire rental situation is fraudulent. I believe Mr. Owens owns these heaters and is claiming they're rentals to circumvent our bylaws regarding primary heating sources. A man I didn't recognize near the front raised his hand. Why do we have a bylaw about primary heating sources anyway? What difference does it make how someone heats their house? Patricia looked flustered. It's about maintaining property values and community standards. Portable heaters are unsightly and could be a safety hazard. My heaters are inside my house, I pointed out. The only reason you can see them is because you're looking through my windows. Which I have every right to do as HOA president, Patricia said. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's called being a peeping Tom, Frank said loudly, and several people laughed. Patricia's face turned red. This is not a joke. I'm proposing an emergency amendment to Section 14 of the bylaws that would explicitly ban the rental of portable heating equipment for use as primary heat sources within the community. Linda, the treasurer, looked uncomfortable. Patricia, I'm not sure we can just ban rental equipment. That seems like it might be overly restrictive. We can ban whatever we vote to ban, Patricia insisted. That's the entire point of having an HOA. To maintain standards and prevent people from doing whatever they want. Actually, said a woman I recognized as Susan Edwards, who was a real estate attorney, there are limits to what an HOA can regulate. You can't create bylaws that are arbitrary or capricious, and you definitely can't create bylaws that target specific individuals. If you pass an amendment that's clearly designed to punish one resident for doing something that isn't actually harmful, you're opening the HOA up to a lawsuit. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Donald, the vice president, leaned over and whispered something to her. She listened, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, she said. Then I'm proposing we simply enforce the existing bylaws more strictly. Mr. Owens is in violation of Section 14, Paragraph 3. His rental arrangement doesn't change the fact that he's using portable heaters as his primary heat source. My furnace is working, I said again. I'm running both the central heat and the portable heaters. Why would you do that if your furnace is working? Patricia demanded. I shrugged. Because I'm paying for the rental heaters anyway. Might as well get my money's worth, and it's more comfortable having supplemental heat. Section 14, Paragraph 3 allows for portable heaters to be used as supplemental heating. Patricia looked ready to explode. This is absurd. You're clearly gaming the system. I'm following the bylaws exactly as they're written, I said calmly. If you don't like how they're written, that's not my problem. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with multiple people shouting opinions at once. Some people thought Patricia was being ridiculous and wasting everyone's time. Others thought I was being deliberately difficult and should just comply with the spirit of the bylaws, even if I wasn't technically violating the letter of them. A few people started arguing about completely unrelated HOA issues, including someone's ongoing dispute about Christmas light restrictions and another person's grievance about the color of their mailbox. Eventually, Patricia gavelled the meeting back to order and called for a vote on her proposed emergency amendment. It failed 7-2, with most people abstaining and only Patricia and one other resident voting in favor. She looked around the room with barely contained fury. Fine. But I want it noted in the minutes that I strongly oppose Mr. Owens's actions and believe he's making a mockery of this HOA. Noted, Robert said, not looking up from his phone. The meeting adjourned and people began filing out. Several stopped to talk to me, with most expressing some variation of, "That was the most entertaining HOA meeting we've ever had," or "Patricia had that coming." As I was leaving, Patricia intercepted me at the door. "This isn't over," she hissed. What else is there, Patricia? The vote failed. The bylaws stand as written. I'm not doing anything wrong. "You lied about renting those heaters," she said. "I know you did." "Prove it," I said, and walked out. I should have known better than to taunt her. The next morning, I got a certified letter from the HOA attorney. It was a formal notice of investigation into potential bylaw violations and fraud. The letter stated that the HOA had retained legal counsel to investigate whether I had submitted false documentation regarding the rental equipment, and that if fraud was proven, they would pursue both civil and criminal charges. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter and wondering how this had spiraled so completely out of control. What had started as a sleep-deprived smart-ass response to an absurd complaint had turned into a potential legal nightmare. I needed actual legal advice, so I called Susan Edwards, the real estate attorney from the meeting. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon at her office downtown. Susan's office was in one of the newer buildings near the courthouse, all glass and steel. She greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "So," she said, folding her hands on her desk, "tell me the truth. Did you really rent those heaters or did you make the whole thing up?" I hesitated, then figured honesty was probably the best policy with my attorney. "I made it up. They're my heaters. I've owned them for 3 years. Susan leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Oh, Warren, you've really stepped in it, haven't you?" "Yeah," I admitted. "I was tired and cold and annoyed, and I said something stupid. Then I doubled down on it instead of backing off. Now Patricia's threatening criminal charges for fraud." "Okay, let's talk about what fraud actually is," Susan said, pulling out a legal pad. "Fraud requires several elements. First, a false statement of material fact. Second, knowledge that the statement is false. Third, intent to deceive. Fourth, justifiable reliance by the victim. And fifth, resulting damages to the victim." She looked up at me. "You definitely made a false statement, and you knew it was false. You intended to deceive Patricia. But here's where it falls apart. Patricia didn't rely on your statement in any way that caused her damages. She didn't give you money. She didn't change her position based on your false statement. She just got annoyed and tried to enforce bylaws that you may or may not have been violating." "So I'm not looking at criminal charges?" I asked hopefully. "Criminal fraud? No chance. This doesn't rise anywhere near that level. Civil fraud? Theoretically possible, but she'd have to prove damages. And what damages could she possibly claim? That she was emotionally distressed by your fake rental agreement?" "Please." Susan made a note on her pad. "The HOA might try to fine you for submitting false documentation, but even that's questionable because you submitted the documentation voluntarily, not in response to an official request." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "So what should I do?" "You have 2 options," Susan said. "Option 1, come clean, apologize, admit the whole thing was stupid, and hope Patricia moves on. She probably won't, and she'll probably fine you for something, but at least the situation won't escalate further." "And option 2? Susan grinned. "Option 2, we make this more expensive for the HOA than it's worth to pursue. I send them a letter explaining that their investigation is harassment, that you haven't violated any bylaws because the bylaw in question is unenforceable anyway, and that if they continue to harass you, you'll countersue for abuse of process and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Is that a real thing? Can I actually sue for that? The bar for intentional infliction of emotional distress is pretty high, so you probably wouldn't win, Susan admitted. But the HOA doesn't know that, and their attorney will tell them that defending against the suit would cost thousands of dollars in legal fees. Most HOA attorneys bill at $200 to $300 per hour. Do you think Patricia wants to explain to the rest of the board why she spent $10,000 of HOA funds pursuing a grudge against you over some space heaters? I thought about the look on Patricia's face at the meeting when the vote failed. She might actually. She seems pretty committed to this. Then let her commit to it, Susan said. But I'm betting once the rest of the board sees the potential legal costs, they'll shut her down pretty quickly. HOAs run on annual dues. How much does yours collect? $300 per household per year, I said. There are about 80 homes in the subdivision. Susan did the math quickly. So you've got an annual budget of about $24,000. Take out landscaping for common areas, utilities for the community center, insurance, and other operating costs, and you probably have maybe $5,000 to $10,000 in reserves. One legal dispute could bankrupt your HOA. So we threaten to make it expensive and hope they back down, I said. Exactly. Want me to draft the letter? I thought about it for all of 3 seconds. Yes, absolutely yes. Susan's letter went out the next day. It was 3 pages of dense legal language that essentially said, Warren Owens has not violated any HOA bylaws. Your investigation is harassment. Cease and desist immediately or face legal consequences. Patricia's response was to schedule another emergency board meeting. This one wasn't open to general residents, just the board members. But Donald Pierce, the vice president, was apparently fed up with Patricia's obsession with my heaters because he called me afterward and filled me in on what happened. She's completely lost it, Donald said. She wanted to authorize up to $15,000 for legal fees to pursue this investigation. I asked her what exactly we were investigating, and she couldn't give me a straight answer, just kept saying you were a liar and you needed to be held accountable. What did the rest of the board say? I asked. Linda voted against it, said it was a waste of money. Robert voted against it, said he didn't care enough about the whole thing to spend HOA funds on it. I voted against it. Patricia was the only vote in favor. So it's over? Not quite, Donald said, and I heard the hesitation in his voice. Patricia called a vote of no confidence against herself. I blinked. She what? She said if the board wasn't going to support her in maintaining community standards, then clearly we needed new leadership. She called for a vote of no confidence and said she was resigning as president effective immediately. Wait, so she quit? Yep, walked right out of the meeting, said we could run the HOA into the ground for all she cared. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt a weird mix of guilt and concern. Donald, I didn't want her to quit. I just wanted her to stop harassing me about space heaters. Oh, don't feel bad, Donald said quickly. She's been looking for an excuse to quit for months. Being HOA president is a thankless job, and she was burnt out. You just gave her an excuse to make it dramatic. So what happens now? Now I'm president, at least until we can hold proper elections. And my first official act is to tell you that as far as I'm concerned, you can run every space heater you own all day, every day, and the HOA won't say a word about it. I thanked him and hung up, feeling like I'd just survived something without quite understanding what it was. But Patricia wasn't done yet. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, I was woken up by pounding on my door. When I opened it, I found 2 police officers standing on my porch. Warren Owens? One of them asked. That's me, I said, my heart suddenly racing. We've received a report that you're operating an unlicensed business out of your residence, the officer said, checking his notepad. Something about renting heating equipment without a business license? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Come in, officers. This is going to require some explanation. I invited them into my living room and explained the whole ridiculous situation. The freeze, Patricia's complaints, my made-up rental story, the HOA meeting, everything. The 2 officers listened, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they were trying not to laugh. When I finished, the younger officer said, "So, just to be clear, you're not actually renting heaters to anyone?" "Correct. I made that up to get my HOA president off my back about using my own heaters in my own house during a freeze." "And the person who filed this report, this Patricia Cunningham, she knows you made it up?" "She suspects it, yes." The older officer shook his head. "Sir, this is the dumbest call I've responded to all week, and yesterday someone reported their neighbor for having an offensive garden gnome." He put away his notepad. "You're not operating a business. You're not doing anything illegal. We're going to file this as an unfounded complaint." "What happens to the person who filed a false report?" I asked. "Nothing probably, unless you want to press charges for filing a false police report. But honestly, I'd recommend against it. It'll just escalate things further, and it sounds like you've already got enough drama with this HOA situation." They left, and I sat down on my couch, staring at the wall. This had to stop. Patricia might have resigned from the HOA board, but clearly she wasn't done trying to make my life miserable. I called Susan Edwards again. "Patricia just sent the cops to my house claiming I'm operating an unlicensed business." Susan was quiet for a moment. "That's harassment. That's actually legally actionable harassment. She's using government resources to pursue a personal vendetta." "What can I do about it?" "You can get a protective order. It's usually used in domestic situations, but it applies to any situation where someone is repeatedly harassing you. I can help you file the paperwork on Monday." "Will it work?" "If we can show a pattern of behavior, yes. The HOA complaints, the investigation, the police call. That's enough to establish harassment. A judge will order her to stop contacting you, stop filing complaints about you, and stay a certain distance away from you." "That seems extreme," I said. "She sent the police to your house on a Saturday morning based on a complaint she knew was false," Susan said. "That's extreme. We're just responding proportionally." I spent the weekend thinking about it. Part of me wanted to just let it go, move on, pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being pushed around by petty tyrants who thought a position on an HOA board gave them unlimited power, wanted to see this through. On Monday morning, I met Susan at the courthouse and we filed for a protective order against Patricia Cunningham. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Commons got weird. With Patricia gone, Donald took over as HOA president, and his approach was basically to do as little as possible. He sent out one email to the community saying that the board would be focusing on essential functions only, like maintaining common areas and ensuring insurance payments were made, and that they'd be taking a light touch on bylaw enforcement. Several residents emailed to complain that their neighbors were violating various bylaws and demanding action. Donald's response to all of them was essentially, "Deal with it like adults or move." Frank stopped by one afternoon with beers. "You know you've completely changed the dynamic of this neighborhood, right?" he said, settling into one of my porch chairs. "How do you figure?" I asked, accepting a beer. Patricia kept everyone in line through fear. Fear of fines, fear of being called out at HOA meetings, fear of being the next person she decided to target. Now that she's gone and Donald's basically abdicated any real authority, people are realizing that most of the bylaws are unenforceable and nobody really cares if your grass is 3 inches or 3.5 inches. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I asked. Frank considered this. "Honestly, I think it's good. We're all adults. We don't need a neighborhood dictator telling us how to live in our own homes. Yeah, some people might let their yards go a little wild, and some people might park their cars in ways that aren't perfectly aligned, but so what? It's a neighborhood, not a military base." The hearing for the protective order arrived on a Thursday morning. I met Susan at the courthouse at 9 a.m. Patricia was already there with her own attorney, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The hearing was in front of Judge Howard Martinez, a stern-looking man in his 60s who reviewed the filings before looking up at all of us. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Judge Martinez said. "Mr. Owens, you made up a story about renting space heaters to avoid an HOA complaint. Ms. Cunningham, you became convinced he was lying and conducted an investigation. Then you filed a police report claiming he was operating an unlicensed business, which the police determined was unfounded. And now Mr. Owens wants a protective order to prevent you from continuing to harass him. Is that accurate?" Your Honor, if I may, Patricia's attorney started, but the judge held up a hand. I'm asking if my summary is accurate, not for arguments yet. Yes, Your Honor, Susan said. That's accurate. Patricia nodded reluctantly. Judge Martinez looked at Patricia. Ms. Cunningham, did you file a police report claiming Mr. Owens was operating an unlicensed business? Yes, Your Honor, but I believed at the time that it was true, Patricia said. Did you have any evidence that he was renting heaters to other people, or just that he'd claimed to have rented heaters for his own use? Patricia hesitated. Just for his own use, but I believed the rental story was false. So you filed a police report based on a rental transaction that, even if it had been real, wouldn't have been illegal, because renting equipment for personal use doesn't require a business license, Judge Martinez said. Do I have that right? Patricia's attorney leaned over and whispered to her. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked at the paperwork in front of him for a long moment, then looked up. Here's what I'm going to do. Mr. Owens, I'm granting a temporary protective order. Ms. Cunningham, you are not to contact Mr. Owens directly or indirectly for any reason. You are not to file any complaints, police reports, or other actions regarding Mr. Owens unless you have clear evidence of actual illegal activity. You are to stay at least 100 feet away from Mr. Owens's property unless you're simply driving past on the public street. Your Honor, Patricia's attorney objected, my client lives in the same subdivision. 100-foot distance will make it difficult for her to access her own home. Judge Martinez looked at him. Does your client live within 100 feet of Mr. Owens? No, Your Honor, but she has to drive past his house to reach her own. Then she can drive past on the public street, as I said. This order doesn't prevent her from normal activities in her own neighborhood. It prevents her from seeking out contact with Mr. Owens or continuing this pattern of harassment. He signed the order with a flourish. This protective order is in effect for 6 months. If there are any violations, Ms. Cunningham, you'll be held in contempt of court. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. We left the courthouse, and I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. That went well, Susan said. Judge Martinez doesn't have much patience for HOA disputes, and he especially doesn't like it when people waste police resources on personal vendettas. So it's really over? I asked. It's really over, Susan confirmed. Patricia would have to be stupid to violate that order, and even if she is that stupid, you're protected now. I paid Susan her fee, thanked her profusely, and went home to my quiet house with my 2 portable heaters safely stored in the garage where they belonged. Life in Meadowbrook Commons settled into a new normal over the next few weeks. Donald served out the rest of Patricia's term as president and declined to run for re-election. A younger couple, the Johnsons, ran on a platform of common-sense HOA governance and won in a landslide. They immediately revised several of the more ridiculous bylaws, including the one about primary heating sources. I saw Patricia occasionally, usually driving past my house on her way to her own home several streets over. She never looked in my direction, and I was fine with that. Frank and I became better friends, often sitting on one of our porches in the evening with beers, watching the neighborhood go about its business without the constant threat of HOA enforcement hanging over everyone. About 2 months after the protective order was granted, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia. I almost threw it away without opening it, worried that even receiving mail from her might somehow violate the protective order from her end. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, not typed, and it was surprisingly short. Mr. Owens, it read, I wanted to apologize for my behavior regarding the heater situation. I let my desire to enforce the rules override my common sense and my basic human decency. Being HOA president brought out the worst in me, and I took out my stress and frustration on you in ways that were completely inappropriate. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I recognize I was wrong. I hope you can enjoy your home in peace. Sincerely, Patricia Cunningham. I read the letter 3 times, trying to figure out if there was some angle I was missing, some hidden attack buried in the apology. But it seemed genuine. I showed it to Frank that evening. He read it and whistled. Well, I'll be damned. Character growth from Patricia Cunningham. Never thought I'd see the day. Do you think I should respond? I asked. Do you want to respond? I thought about it. I don't know. Part of me wants to just ignore it and move on, but part of me thinks maybe acknowledging the apology would be the mature thing to do. What'd Susan say about it? I pulled out my phone and texted her a photo of the letter. She responded almost immediately. If you respond, keep it brief and don't say anything that could be construed as waiving the protective order. So I wrote a short note back. Patricia, I appreciate your apology and I accept it. I hope you're doing well. Warren. I mailed it the next day and didn't hear anything back, which was fine. I wasn't looking for a friendship or even really a cordial relationship. I just wanted to close that chapter of my life and move on. The protective order expired 6 months after it was granted, and I didn't bother to renew it. Patricia had stayed completely out of my way, and there seemed to be no reason to continue the legal protection. Life went on. I got a promotion at work. I dated someone for a few months, though that didn't work out. I replaced my ancient furnace with a new energy-efficient model, which meant I probably wouldn't need those portable heaters anymore, though I kept them just in case. The HOA under the Johnsons' leadership was boring in the best possible way. They sent out occasional emails about neighborhood events, maintained the common areas, and otherwise left everyone alone. The community center got used for actual community events, like kids' birthday parties and a monthly potluck dinner, rather than kangaroo court HOA meetings. About a year after the whole heater incident, I was at the hardware store buying supplies for a deck repair when I ran into Patricia in the plumbing aisle. We both froze for a moment, then she gave me a small, awkward smile. Hello, Warren, she said. Patricia, I said with a nod. I really did mean what I said in that letter, she said. I'm sorry for everything. I know, I said. Water under the bridge. She seemed to relax slightly. I heard you got promoted. Congratulations. Thank you. I heard you started volunteering at the library? Yes, actually. Turns out I like organizing things. I just don't like being in charge of people. She laughed, a genuine sound I'd never heard from her before. Organizing books is much more satisfying and much less stressful. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing important, then went our separate ways. It wasn't friendship, but it was civil, and that was enough. Looking back on the whole ridiculous situation, I'm still not sure what the moral of the story is. Don't lie to your HOA president. Don't let petty tyrants push you around. Sometimes doubling down on a stupid joke can have unexpected consequences. Maybe the real lesson is that HOAs, like any organization run by volunteers with a little bit of power and no real oversight, can bring out either the best or the worst in people. Patricia let it bring out her worst. I like to think that Donald and the Johnsons let it bring out their best, using their positions to make the community better rather than using them as weapons against their neighbors. Or maybe the lesson is just that people are complicated, and sometimes the person harassing you about space heaters during a freeze is just a stressed-out, burnt-out person who needs to step back and reevaluate their priorities. Either way, I still have those 2 portable heaters in my garage. They're sitting there next to my Christmas decorations and my camping gear, waiting for the next emergency. And every time I see them, I smile a little bit, remembering the time I convinced my HOA president that I was paying $600 a day to rent space heaters during a freeze. It was stupid. It was petty. It was completely unnecessary. And I'd probably do it again. The next winter came around, and with it, another cold snap. Not as severe as the one that started the whole mess, but cold enough that I pulled out the portable heaters just in case. This time, though, I didn't need them. My new furnace worked perfectly, keeping my house warm without any issues. I mentioned this to Frank one evening as we sat on my porch, wrapped in blankets and drinking hot chocolate spiked with whiskey. You know what's funny? Frank said. That whole situation with Patricia probably saved this HOA. How do you figure? Think about it. Before all that happened, people were scared of the HOA. They followed the rules because they were afraid of fines and harassment. Now, people follow the rules or don't, based on whether the rules actually make sense. The HOA has actual authority based on mutual agreement and common sense, not fear. That's a pretty generous interpretation, I said. I think mostly people just realized Patricia was ridiculous and stopped caring what the HOA thought. Same result, though, Frank pointed out. The HOA went from being a neighborhood menace to being a neighborhood organization that actually serves the community. And it happened because you pushed back against absurd overreach. I pushed back by lying and doubling down on the lie, I said. Yeah, but it worked, didn't it? Frank grinned. Sometimes you have to fight absurdity with absurdity. I couldn't really argue with that. The story could have ended there, but there was one more twist to come. About 18 months after the initial heater incident, I got a call from a reporter at the Amarillo Globe News. She'd heard about the HOA dispute through some public records request she'd made about protective orders, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk about my experience. I'm doing a piece on HOA overreach, she explained. Your case is a perfect example of how these organizations can spiral out of control over something completely trivial. I was hesitant at first, but after talking it over with Frank and Susan, I agreed to be interviewed. The article ran a few weeks later under the headline, Local Man's Space Heater Dispute Highlights HOA Problems. It was a fair piece, presenting both sides of the story. The reporter had even managed to get an interview with Patricia, who spoke candidly about how the pressure of being HOA president had caused her to lose perspective. I was trying so hard to maintain order and enforce the rules that I forgot the point was to maintain a pleasant community, not to rule it with an iron fist, Patricia was quoted as saying. Mr. Owens's situation was a wake-up call that I'd gone too far. The article generated more attention than I expected. I got calls from people in other states dealing with their own HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I was invited to speak at a local town hall about HOA reform. The Texas legislature even briefly considered a bill that would limit HOA enforcement powers, though it ultimately didn't pass. I declined most of the attention, not wanting to become some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I just wanted to use my space heaters in peace. But the attention did lead to one positive development. Several HOAs in the Amarillo area revised their bylaws to be less restrictive and to include better processes for resolving disputes without immediately jumping to fines and legal action. Meadowbrook Commons became something of a model for reasonable HOA governance. The Johnsons wrote up a new set of guiding principles that emphasized community over compliance, and other HOAs reached out to learn from their approach. And me. I just went back to my normal life. I went to work, I maintained my house, I hung out with Frank and other neighbors. The portable heater stayed in my garage, a reminder of one of the strangest episodes of my life. Every now and then, someone new would move into Meadowbrook Commons, and they'd hear the story about the guy who claimed he was paying $600 a day to rent space heaters. Sometimes they'd ask me about it directly, and I'd give them the short version, leaving out most of the drama and just playing it for laughs. Because at the end of the day, that's what it was. A ridiculous story about a ridiculous situation that somehow became a referendum on HOA governance and personal freedom and the social contract between neighbors. It was about portable heaters, but it wasn't really about portable heaters at all. It was about standing up to unreasonable authority. It was about people letting power go to their heads. It was about the difference between rules that serve a community and rules that control a community. It was about how far someone will go to save face when they've committed to a position. It was about redemption and apology and moving forward. Or maybe, just maybe, it really was just about space heaters during a freeze, and everything else was just me and everyone else overthinking it. I prefer to think it's the latter. Life is complicated enough without turning every minor conflict into a philosophical statement. But I'll tell you one thing. I will never, ever get rid of those portable heaters. They're staying in my garage forever, a trophy from the time I convinced an entire HOA that emergency heating equipment rents for $300 a day per unit. Best lie I ever told. The Meadowbrook Commons community continued to thrive under reasonable leadership. The neighborhood felt different now, more relaxed, more friendly. People actually talked to each other instead of worrying about being reported for bylaw violations. Block parties became regular occurrences. Kids played in the streets without someone complaining about noise violations. Frank and I often joked that we should write a book about the whole experience. HOA horror stories, or space heater wars, or something equally ridiculous. We never did, of course, but it made for good conversation on those cold winter evenings when we'd sit on one of our porches, watching the neighborhood go about its business, grateful that the most dramatic thing happening was someone's dog barking or someone's teenager learning to drive. Patricia moved away about 2 years after the initial incident. She got a job in Dallas and decided a fresh start was what she needed. She sent me a card before she left, just a simple, "Thank you for being gracious about everything" message. I sent one back wishing her well. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was doing well in Dallas, working as a project coordinator for some nonprofit, and apparently much happier without the stress of HOA politics. Good for her. The Johnsons served as HOA president and vice president for 3 years before passing the torch to another couple who shared their philosophy of minimal intervention. The HOA became so drama-free that attendance at monthly meetings dropped to almost nothing, which everyone agreed was a sign of success rather than failure. My portable heaters never became an issue again. I used them occasionally on particularly cold nights, running them as supplemental heat just like the bylaws allowed. Nobody looked twice, nobody cared, it was glorious. And that, finally, really is the end of the story. A story about how a moment of sleep-deprived sarcasm during a freeze turned into an HOA civil war, which turned into a protective order, which turned into an apology, which turned into a better community for everyone. I still live in Meadowbrook Commons. I still have my portable heaters. And every winter when the temperature drops, I think about that morning when Patricia showed up at my door, demanding I turn off my heaters. And I smile. Because sometimes, just sometimes, standing your ground against absurdity, even in the most ridiculous ways, can actually make a difference. Even if that difference started with a made-up rental company and a completely fictional $300 per day rate. Best $300 per day I never spent.